Dimitri, busy day today. We had this GST credit, if you will, finally go through the House of Commons. Interestingly enough, of course, the Conservatives voted against it. So let's start with that.
Yes, let's start with that, Aaron. So the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois voted against it. They've seen it and they've said from the very beginning that this is a gimmick and have challenged the government on basically this measure contributing to inflation. And if you think about it, the argument both of these parties are making is a cut in the GST at this time benefits the wealthiest most. And the examples that are out there is if somebody can afford to go to the restaurant and spend $1,000, well, they get a $130 break, whereas the family that's struggling and is paying $50, $60, $70 for a meal for their family, they get a $3 break. The big question here is why are the Liberals doing this and why are they doing it now? In one part, the NDP keeps wedging them, even though their formal agreement is apparently ripped up. They continue to work together. It's all a matter of trying to avoid an election. And make no mistake, it is perceived in many ways as an attempt at vote buying. What's interesting enough is Prime Minister Trudeau wanted to pass both the GST and the $250 check to anybody who earned $150,000 or less in 2023. And the NDP said, no, we're not going down that path. If you choose to do that, we will vote against it. So he's back down, split the GST into one vote. I suspect that the $250 check will be reviewed, refined, reanalyzed, but will not be coming to a vote in the House of Commons before the end of 2024, which means the risk for an election is once again postponed to 2025. And is the Liberal government going to hold or wanting to send out a check to folks who earned $150,000 or less in 2023? And will there be something for retirees? Because this check is only aimed at people who worked in 2023 and made $150,000 or less.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand those. So Jagmeet Singh made that a reason to decide not to go along until they would consider it, they being the Liberals. Are you suggesting that the Conservatives, if this was made available to retirees and people with disabilities, would go along with this?
I'm not suggesting that because right now it's all hypothetical. There's so much negotiating, bargaining going on between political parties, especially the NDP and the Liberals, that you don't know what the policy of the day is. Is it going to stick? Is it going to last? And what will the final outcome be? In this case, they just voted on the GST. As far as Quebec is related, they only get a 5% rebate on the GST because Quebec has not harmonized its sales tax, whereas Ontario and other provinces who have, the rebate is 13%. And then the discussion becomes, well, provinces like New Brunswick, new Liberal Premier says, we don't want to take away the sales tax. So is the federal government going to compensate for that? Which means the program will cost more than what it was initially intended.
Let me go and talk about what's happening now vis-a-vis Donald Trump, this whole idea of a 25% tariff, and then the prime minister and everybody else in that government coming out and saying, don't worry, we're all over this. We'll take care of it. Emergency meeting of premiers yesterday. Already talk of money being thrown to kind of fix the border problem. What do you think Justin Trudeau, in fact, should be doing here? What's your advice to him here?
So that's an interesting question, Aaron, and I'm not one to give advice to the current prime minister, but if I was advising a prime minister today, my advice would be get on a plane and go and meet President Trump in person. Try and figure this out because ultimately what President Trump has done is he's thrown the entire country into a tailspin, into a frenzy. Premiers are completely panicked. The business community is completely panicked. All it took is one tweet by the president-elect, and it's all we've been talking about for the last week. What the President-elect Trump has also done is he's made a very clear commitment to Americans, to his people, to his voters, that he's going to reduce by half energy prices. Guess who the United States gets most of its energy from? Whether it's oil, whether it's natural gas, whether it's electricity, hydro. Canada, which means if there's going to be a 25% tariff on Canadian energy, well, his commitment to his voters and to the American people to reduce energy costs will not be fulfilled. So, you know, he tends to start off with a baseball bat, and when I say he, I mean President Trump. He tries to get his opponent on the defensive. He succeeded in this, and the premiers were not united. The premiers fed into the frenzy by publicly basically saying the federal government has no plan, by publicly being critical of the federal government, which gives Donald Trump more ammunition.
But you're kind of making it seem, Dimitri, like, if we recognize that this is just a threat more than anything else, and not even a real threat, because you're right, energy prices would go up if this was the case. My favorite reference to this threat, if you will, by Trump is if he followed through, including Mexico in this, beer prices would go up 12%. And of course, Americans would never stand for that. But if we're not supposed to be taking him seriously, are we overreacting to this?
Well, we are overreacting publicly. There's an old saying that says, stay calm and carry on. We need to unlink the threat between the Americans' concern on our border. We need to remind the Americans that border security is a common responsibility. We are responsible to protect our border in terms of who enters Canada. The United States is responsible to protect their border in terms of who enters the United States. Our government, sadly, has not been tough on border control. Our government, sadly, federal government, has not taken this responsibility seriously. Whether it's Roxham Road, which was a debate for several years, whether it's fake asylum seekers, whether it's immigration basically spiraling out of control. But there needs to be an adult conversation between the Prime Minister and the President on both countries taking border security seriously and having a common plan.
I will put, to your point, by the way, of Justin Trudeau meeting Donald Trump, there was a question asked today. I want you to take a listen to this. This is about with Pierre Poilievre.
If invited, would you be willing to go to Mar-a-Lago before the next election to discuss these issues with Donald Trump?
I have not been invited to that, so...
He's not been invited, Dimitri. Pierre Poilievre has not yet been invited. Should he go anyway? Should he crash?
Well, you can't just show up if you're not invited.
No.
I'm not aware if our current Prime Minister has been invited, but he is the one that should be going. He is the one that should be representing the country. Journalists asking this question almost validates the fact that Pierre Poilievre is going to be the next Prime Minister, and that's who Donald Trump should be negotiating with. But at the end of the day, our current Prime Minister is Justin Trudeau. The other element that I will conclude on is saying we need somebody who has a very clear mandate from the people. And this constant call for a federal election, regardless of who wins, somebody needs to be able to sit down with the American president and says, I have a mandate from the Canadian people. The premiers, once again, running around like chickens without a head has not been helpful this week. And we saw the change in their tone. So last night after the meeting with the Prime Minister, the premiers were being very critical of Prime Minister Trudeau. This morning, we saw a complete change of their tone, which is the right thing to do. You cannot go into a negotiation admitting publicly that you're in a position of weakness.
I let you go. I just want to ask one last thing here with respect to Donald Trump meeting Justin Trudeau. I heard, I think this might have been earlier in the week, it might have been last week, Pierre Poilievre at one point talking about the fact that, we would push back. Once this 25% tariff story came up, do you think that's the correct approach, is pushing back and saying we're not going to be pushed around as Canadians just because Donald Trump is threatening this?
Absolutely. Our two economies are so interlinked, and there should be some pushback on the Americans. And I think that it is quite possible, and I don't know the answer to this, it is quite possible that the Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, is doing the right thing. What do I mean by that? You don't talk strategy, you do strategy. So, and the point of him meeting with President-elect Trump, that is just my advice. There is no meeting, to the best of my knowledge, at this time.
We will let it go. I think you have some business to take care of there with your little guys. Go on.
Thank you so much.
All right. See you later. Dimitri Soudas.